Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Sam Kwok here, one half of the Kwok Brothers. So you just became a landlord, whether you wanted to as part of an investment decision, or you accidentally became a landlord because you inherited a property from a family member, or you decided not to sell your house, but you chose to rent instead. And all of a sudden, now you have a tenant and you don't know what to do. So here in this video, I'm gonna give you my top 7 tips to get you started. As someone who's been a landlord since 2017, I've made plenty of mistakes that I definitely don't want you to make. And I hope that these 7 tips will at least get you started in the right direction and get you the resources you need so that you're at least prepared to deal with what's coming next. Okay, so tip number 1 is know your market rate for your rent, also known as your rental comps. What this basically means is that you can't just arbitrarily decide randomly what amount you can charge for your rent. I mean, you could, but probably not a good idea. Instead, what we want to know is how much is the average rent going for in our given area for a similar size unit of a house or a townhome, whatever property you have, but also looking at what other homes like mine with the same bedroom and bathroom counts, how much are they going for in terms of what tenants are saying yes to. So you can do this by simply going to sites like rentalmeter.com, which I'll leave that in the video description down below. Or if you have a friend or you know a real estate agent that you're working with, they can get you something called the rental comps, which should give you a range for how much you should charge for your home when you're renting it out for a new tenant. Tip number 2 is know your true cost of your rental operation. And what that means is that every business, like owning a rental property, has an operating cost. So if you own an ice cream store, well, you're paying for the ice cream, the cones, maybe the signage. So just like any other business, a rental business also has costs associated to renting the property. So a few things that you might already know are obviously the property taxes that you're paying. You're also going to be paying for a insurance, or specifically a landlord insurance, not just a homeowner insurance. But there are also invisible costs that are not apparent to first-time landlords, such as number 1, there's gonna be some maintenance costs that you're gonna have to deal with over time. So what I like to do as a rule of thumb is I take my rent amount, so let's say $1,800 a month, and I take 10% of that $1,800, which is $180, and set it aside every single month for either ongoing maintenance, or eventually I may run into a giant maintenance cost that I have to deal with, and I want to be prepared for that. And we're going to talk about hiring property managers in a sec, but regardless, you want to manage this property yourself, meaning dealing with the tenants on a daily basis, or you choose to hire a professional property management company, I would still set aside an additional 10% of your monthly rent for management costs, whether you're going to do it, whether you're going to manage it, or you hire someone else to do it. Now, if you're in the category of you want to manage this by yourself, I would still set aside 10% because, again, you may have to drive to your property to check on it. There's fuel costs associated to a mileage cost. There's, of course, the time cost that's associated to you visiting the rental. So I would still set that aside and basically paying yourself for the cost of managing the properties. So just set aside 10% to cushion yourself just in case in the future, whether you choose to manage the property yourself or you choose to hire a property manager, a professional property management team. Another invisible cost that a lot of landlords don't know, or at least don't think about, is the vacancy cost. Now, it's well within the realm of possibility that your property can be vacant for multiple weeks and on. So what we want to do is I typically set aside 8% of my monthly rent as a vacancy fund in case I have one entire month out of a year that my property is vacant and it's not generating any revenue. So I want to set that aside because I still need to take care of mortgage payments if you have that, take care of property insurance, taxes, and other associated expenses to run that property. So I want to set that aside. Again, you can see that a lot of this is just setting money aside for just in case, for maintenance, management, vacancy, and so on. So you want to set those figures aside because if you don't, and you see a large bill or you're dealing with vacancy expenses, then they're gonna have to come out of your pocket, which is something that we don't want to do. So obviously those are hidden costs that you want to be aware of and factor that in. So of course you wanna know all the expenses as part of calculating what is your true net operating income, which subsequently will tell you what your cash flow is, because obviously we don't wanna lose money every month and we need to know our numbers really well. Number 3 tip is to consult with a professional tax and legal person. Now, they are two separate things. Someone could be an expert in tax, someone could be an expert in legal. There are occasions where someone does both, tax and legal, and they're two different things. Now, you want to talk to your tax and legal professionals about not only tax ramifications, but also tax planning, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But you also want to talk to them about liability protection, because say a tenant gets hurt in your property, they trip and fall, they might sue you. And if they do sue you, well, they can come after your personal assets, personal car, personal home, etc. So we don't want to be in that scenario where if a tenant does sue you, that you're personally liable. So you'll want to talk to a tax and legal professional, that being a lawyer or a CPA, about protecting yourself and protecting your personal asset by creating something like an LLC or a corporation, which most tax professionals and attorneys will probably recommend LLCs. But of course, you'll want to talk to your tax and legal professional because they'll probably know more than I do. And also get familiar with something called umbrella policy. Some attorneys may recommend this in some cases where instead of needing an LLC, they might just recommend you get an umbrella policy, which is a type of an insurance that protects you with your liability. It all depends on the state you live in, the city and county, because different state has different taxes and different requirements. So you definitely want to talk to a professional about that. A quick little note about LLCs is that if your attorney recommends that you get an LLC and you have an existing mortgage already, you may also want to talk to your bank about potentially the ramification of transferring your property, which was in your name originally, over to an LLC name, because there is something called a due on sale clause, which in a case of a transfer like that from your personal name to an LLC, the bank may require you to pay off your mortgage. Now, this is kind of rare as long as you're making your payments on time. But again, do check with your attorneys and your bank professionals because again, it all depends on different case and scenarios. Number 4 tip is if you're in a scenario where you're looking for tenants, you're brand new to this, I highly recommend to have a process and a procedure for screening your tenants. Now, what does that mean? Well, you want your tenants to audition and basically tell you why they're a good tenant for you. I mean, we're talking about your property and we don't want just any stranger walking in living in it, right? So we want to make sure that the strangers that we're bringing in, that we call tenants, we want to make sure that not only their credit is good, but they can also pay the rent, that they have a steady source of income coming in, because we don't want to be in this awkward situation where you bring someone in who's unemployed and they can't pay you rent. That would be not a good situation. So what I recommend at a minimum is to, yes, do a background and credit check. Make sure you do that. There are service providers that you can pay 20, 30, 40 bucks to get a quick background and credit check. Another thing I do is I also ask for 1 or 2 months of pay stub. Now, what you want to know is there are county and city and states that actually make it illegal for you to ask that. So do know, this is coming up next, is to know your landlord-tenant laws. But at minimum, at least where I am in my area, I check their credit, I check their background, criminal history. I also want to see if they have a steady source of income coming in, because really at the end of the day, the biggest thing is, of course, making sure that they have the ability to pay the rent without them feeling financially stressed. So making sure that you have that information before you say yes to a tenant, because once they're in and they're not the best tenants, they're not paying rent on time, and they're causing lots of trouble, then this is where the headache starts. Number 5 tip is to get familiar with the local landlord-tenant ordinance, or sometimes known as the Landlord-Tenant Act in your area. Now, major cities like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they have, as a city, its own Landlord-Tenant Act that you need to get familiar with, but most states will have a statewide Landlord-Tenant Act, a rule and law as to what landlords can and cannot do and what tenants can and cannot do. So definitely be familiar with this, because if you break the law and obviously the tenants have a ground to sue you, then you could be found at being fault and you'll be liable, and that's not a good day for anybody. So make sure that you are familiar. You don't have to be an expert at it, but at least be familiar with the major content of your local city, county, or state Landlord-Tenant Act. Some cities actually have some programs where I've been a landlord at a particular city where they actually required you to sit in on a day-long class called a Good Landlord Workshop. You actually had to sit in at the seminar for the entire day that's hosted by the city to get your landlord permits. So yes, there are cities that could make you do that. So just check and make sure you know about the local rules. Number 6 is to get a good litigation real estate attorney on standby or on speed dial, if that's the language you want to use. As much as we don't want this to happen or we don't think it's going to happen, it will happen. And that is, you're gonna have issues with their tenants, or you're gonna have a scenario where the tenant breaks the law or breaks the lease, whatever the case might be. There could be cases when bad tenants do bad things. Now, the worst thing you could do is to simply turn a blind eye and pretend it's not happening. You need to talk to a legal professional, someone who's in the real estate litigation space, and consult with them as to what the options are to either evict the tenant or work with the tenant to a healthy solution. But the lesson is, you don't want to be scrambling to find someone that you can talk to in midst of a crisis. My recommendation is find 1 or 2 real estate attorneys on standby that you know, put them on your phone, right? Or your address book, and get their number ready to go in case those types of situations happen, because you don't want to be waiting around. When you have real estate problems will grow over time if you don't deal with it. So make sure you have a professional standby. And last but not least, number 7 tip for our landlords, and that is take advantage of the tax deductions and tax strategies that come with owning real estate. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of tax benefits of owning real estate. Talk to a CPA as to what that is. There are cases where you're gonna save a lot of money on taxes just because you own a piece of real estate, especially a rental property. So talk to a CPA about taking deduction. There are instances where you can actually convert a lot of your personal expenses over to a business expense, which further lowers your taxable income, which means you're saving money. But also there's things like depreciation, cost segregation. I mean, there's so many different things you can talk to your CPA about. So consult with them, because you can be saving a ton of money by just owning real estate on taxes. So those are my top 7 tips for new landlords who are either getting started as a decision that you made, or maybe you accidentally became a landlord like I mentioned. So I hope this video gets you in the right path, in the right direction to get more resource. And of course, I can give you a ton of more tips about being a landlord, investing, making money. All that you can find here in our channel. There's a ton of video about it. But if you enjoy this video, and if you know someone who just became a landlord and they're kind of struggling, make sure you share this video with them, because this could help them save a lot of headaches, a lot of stress. So leave your thoughts below. And by the way, YouTube thinks that this video right here is the best video for you. So definitely check out that video next, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.